Welcome to Oregon Voters Digest, the program that brings forward the social and political issues that are important to people living here in the Pacific Northwest. And now, your host, Bruce Broussard.
Welcome again to this segment of the Oregon Voters Digest. I'm Bruce Broussard, your host. And again, we'll get right into this particular program. I have with me today Dr. Bethel, Senior Pastor of Maranatha at 4222 Northeast 12th Avenue, who happened to also be the president of the Albina Ministerial Alliance. Okay, they recently held a candidates fair here in Northeast Portland at the June Key Delta Community Center at 5940 North Albina Street, and that was on a Thursday, which was on March the 1st,
yes,
if you will, from 6 p.m. to 8:30, and it was quite a candidates fair. And just getting right into it, I'm going to just turn it right over to Dr. Bethel, and he will give us sort of an introduction, the rationale for having such a candidates fair, and some of the participants. Dr. Bethel.
Bruce, thank you. It's good to be here this afternoon. AMA, through this coalition for police accountability and reform, we've always been seeking to advocate on behalf of the community. The Albina Ministerial Alliance, as you know, has been around for over 50 years here in the Albina district. It is composed of many different congregations and ministers across ethnic lines, denominational lines, all because we are concerned about what's happening in our community. We wanted to do a forum to allow our community to have an opportunity to voice the issues and concerns that they have and to hear directly from the candidates that we're running. We felt also by having this particular opportunity, candidates would be able to know that there are people in the community, the African American community particularly, in Portland, North and Northeast Portland, that are concerned about things that are happening in our city. That we are a community and we're not wanting to be taken for granted. We do vote. Mm-hmm. We do believe that our candidates ought to be held accountable. And I, for one, believe that if they will not be accountable, that when this time comes around, election time, right, that's when you hire them or you fire them.
That's right, that's right.
But in order to do that, you got to know,
yes,
what the individuals are doing. So also, when we look at this, we wanted to make sure that individuals are educated. We know that when we look back at history, that for the opportunity for African Americans to vote in this country, there was a law that was passed, a voter's right, which allowed them to be able to vote. People laid down their lives, gave their lives for us to have this opportunity. Now we have the opportunity. We must take the opportunity to continue to vote, but we also must become educated voters. Mm-hmm. We must know what the candidate is proposing that he or she will try to do once they get into office. So then that we will know that once you're there, you promised or said you were going to try to work on this, then we hold you accountable for that, and we want to support you in doing that. And then we want to call back to your attention if you forget what you promised that you were going to work on. We are concerned about in this particular time because our mayors are coming up. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And we know, and the public knows as well, that the mayors that we have, mm-hmm, are there, okay, and they need to be held accountable. Okay. So as we look into this forum, you'll see something from the mayors, you'll see something from the community, and interacting with them. Right. You will also see the commissioner's race. I trust that you will pay attention, get the education, get the answers, and be an educated voter when it's time to vote.
Good. Let's go. We'll just get right into the mayoral candidates at this point in time, and then we'll be right back after the break. The technical aspect of it, but we'll get right back up in that, Dr. Bethel.
Yes.
Briefly, while they're waiting on this piece, what about the AMA, just for a moment or two, just real briefly, what is the AMA?
Yeah, the Albina Ministerial Alliance has been around for over 50 years. It started back with Pastor John Jackson and several other ministers, and it's always been about advocating for the community. Mm-hmm. We've been involved in community services such as housing, rental assistance, daycare, and different things like that. About 5 years or so ago, we removed ourselves from doing the services on that end, and we're more now into the advocacy for the community, advocacy and fellowship and relationship building for the ministries across denominational lines and ethnic lines, because when we join our hands together, we can accomplish much more together than we can being alone.
The churches, as far as involvement, as far as the church is concerned, is it just strictly the Portland metropolitan area, or the state?
It's basically the Portland metropolitan area, while we do have a few churches that are a part of us and support us, and we support them that are in the Vancouver area. But mostly we're here in northeast Portland, around the Albina district.
I noticed Dr. Haynes was there that other night.
Yes, I've got to say Dr. Leroy Haynes is the chairman of the our coalition of police accountability and reform, and he also serves as the vice president of Albina Ministerial Alliance, and he pastors at the Allen Temple AME Church.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Excuse me, CME Church.
CME Church. All right, get that right. Okay, fine. Let's get to the candidates now. Here they are.
I'm Charlie Hales. I'm running for mayor.
And I'm Eileen Brady, and I'm running for mayor. Thanks for having us.
So you've got these questions in advance. I'll just project the mic. We'll start with you, Jefferson, for the first one. Do you plan to retain the police bureau in your portfolio? For those of you who don't know, the mayor has the option of being the commissioner in charge of the police department, or they can delegate that to another commissioner. So the question is, do you plan to retain the police bureau in your portfolio? And if so, how will your role as police commissioner differ from the current or other police commissioners in the city of Portland?
Jefferson, I'd just like to interrupt. This is 30 seconds. This is 2 minutes. Thank you.
So, raise your hand if you have paid attention to a lot of city politics over the last 5 or 10 years. All right, most people in the room. Then I will abbreviate what I was about to say. I have tried to be careful about committing the delegation of any bureau until I understand and have a good sense of who the next city council is going to be. An exception to that is the police bureau. All things equal, I will make delegation based on ability and interest. The police bureau, though, all things being equal, goes to the mayor. I don't think it is necessary that the mayor has the police bureau, but at this point in Portland history, it is nearly necessary. In terms of what we should do differently, how should this police bureau or the next police commissioner do things differently? I think it should, yes, include with an eye backwards to community policing, but I think that it should include a definition that looks forwards. That means thinking about how we can see the whole picture, understanding that law enforcement is a later step along a whole set of choices about how we plan our city, how we lay out public transit, how we work with groups that deal with our mentally ill community members and brothers and sisters, how we engage the community more broadly. Second, I think it does mean engaging the community more broadly, not only in law enforcement, but even at the beginning, and with review and training and the very elements of law enforcement. Also, eyes on the street, thinking about how we plan our city so it makes sense. In response to another question, I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then it means doing police work and building a culture and advocating for a culture within the police bureau that is focused on solving problems. So I went to New York City and met with some people there. They saw in 2010 a 30% drop in intentional firearm discharges by New York City police officers. They had 8 police-initiated firearm deaths, which is 8 more than 0, but they had 93 in 1971, including, I think, 274 injuries. What they did differently, some was about the crime rate overall, but one of the big things they did differently was training, making sure that they trained to solve problems. And I will have a problem-solving culture in the police bureau that we'll talk more about.
Well, I know we are supposed to talk about police issues, but I have to just take a moment and celebrate where we are, because this is an amazing place that the Deltas have created. My wife Nancy's here. She's a volunteer in the garden. But more importantly, this amazing group of women, the Deltas, have gone and done something spectacular. The first living building challenge building in the city, built by voluntary activism and self-help, rather than a multi-million-dollar budget downtown. So let's just hear it for the Deltas with everybody and all the rest of it. I will keep the police bureau in my portfolio. The mayor should not delegate that bureau to anyone else. Although I agree with Jefferson, you look at the abilities and passions of the other members of the council and assign things to them based on those interests, but the buck stops with the mayor on police, and I'll keep that bureau in my portfolio. Not just because that's where the responsibility lies, but because this is a motivating issue for me in running for this office in the first place. I worked with Chief Charles Moose. I saw what real community policing looked like and how well it worked in our community, and we need to return to that effective model of partnership between neighborhoods and the police bureau. Now, there's still people in the bureau that believe in that approach. I've done a ride-along with Madison Caesar and seen him roll the windows down as he goes by Unthank Park and call kids out by name and ask them when they're going home that evening. You know, that's the way it's done. And I've been out with the gang enforcement team with Chris Burley and Derek Foxworth Jr. There are people in the bureau who are excellent examples of community policing, but we need to make that the company policy once again in the bureau, and that gets down to very specific issues that we have to change in the bureau, like training and some incentives and changes in how our officers live in the community. I want an incentive for officers to live in our neighborhoods because only 30% do now, and we are a much safer place if a police officer lives down the street from one of us and that officer, he or she, is one of us. So that set of cultural changes must be managed by somebody who really cares about those issues and who has the formal responsibility for the police bureau.
Thank you for having us. And let me start by saying, I agree with Charlie. The mayor in this town has to have the police bureau as part of their portfolio. We have neighbors who are crying out for help. They're crying out for attention to be paid to this police bureau, and the mayor has got to step up and provide the leadership for that. We have a situation where we have to rebuild the community trust with the police bureau, with our whole public safety system as a whole. Being a police officer, I believe, is one of the hardest jobs in this community. And I have, in full disclosure, my grandfather was a police officer and a police detective in Chicago, and he was killed in the line of duty. He left 9 children, the oldest of which was my father, who was 13 years old. And I personally know what it means to have that kind of hole left in your family, and I was raised understanding what it means to put your life on the line as a public servant. So please know I bring that perspective to the table. And that said, there are serious problems of accountability and equity in this city. And we can have both an accountable and a respected force, and I will take the leadership to do that. Specifically, I will help the force continue to diversify their office, their force, the officers. We have 33 officers out of something like 969 that are actually African American. I know that it's going in the right direction. It is nowhere near where it needs to be if we want our force to reflect our community. Number 2, we need to have a mental health unit as part of our police department. Every crisis call needs to go through this mental health unit. That is a best practice. We should be employing it immediately. I will chair the Gang Violence Task Force because I think this is significant, and when I have more time, I'll tell you the rest. Thank you.
So Ms. Brady, if you had been mayor when the Occupy movement erupted on the public scene, what would you have done differently, and what would you have done the same as Mayor Adams?
Well, first of all, let me say that the Occupy movement, I think, has a very important message. And in fact, it's the reason I'm running for mayor. We have got to rebuild our economy. We've got to give opportunities to everybody. Wall Street hit Main Street very, very hard. So I have a lot of empathy for the Occupy movement. And I'm a civil disobedience activist. I've actually spent time in jail in my younger years for a no nukes demonstration. And here's what I know about civil disobedience. It's honorable. In fact, you want to make a point, you're going to break a law to do it. In this case, it was an anti-camping law, and there are consequences for that. And if I was mayor, and I've said this since the beginning, I would sit down with the protesters and say, there's going to be a deadline, it's going to be soon, it's probably going to be within a week. I'm going to help you make this a peaceful demonstration and be able to get your point across. That said, I would say that we actually saw the best of Portland when those parks were cleared. The force, the actual protesters, the mental health advocates, the homeless advocates, all came together and cleared those parks in a peaceful manner. Thank you.
I was with a Jobs with Justice group yesterday morning as they prepared to continue the Occupy movement. And I think there is a lot more to it, actually, than just jobs. It's also about the massive inequity of wealth in this country. And those are issues that we must raise and that we must address as a society nationally. So I more than appreciate, I share the goals of that movement to raise those issues and then deal with them. And of course, they have to be dealt with in federal policy, as hard as that may be, or even as obnoxious as it may be to think that we have to go to Congress to fix these things, because Congress seems so dysfunctional. But that's where that change ultimately has to land, is that I hope, a reformed Congress. Now, as to what's happened here in Portland, I believe that the chief and the mayor exercised real restraint and care and discretion about how it was handled over that first weekend. But I've said all along that as a former parks commissioner, I knew that that was an untenable situation, both because none of us gets to appropriate a city park to our own cause for an extended time period, and because those two parks were never set up for long-term habitation. So essentially, like Eileen said, I would have done a similar thing. I would have gone to the movement in those early days after that first weekend, because again, I think it was handled with great care that first weekend, and said, let's find you a venue, Pioneer Courthouse Square. I got it for you free from now until the Christmas tree goes up. I will be there with you, both in spirit and in flesh, because I believe in your movement, but we have to find housing for people other than this park, and not have that park be an extended campground. So I think it's the responsibility of leadership in the community to support civic activism, but also to respect public space, and then bottom line, to not run up $1.5 million in police overtime to sort of manage the situation.
So this is a place where there's a difference in this race. I will acknowledge that I'm the one candidate up here who in the first week or two did not call for the authorization of a forcible removal of the occupied tents downtown. And let's be very clear, however nice we were, however direct engagement we participated in, asking them to leave, and leaving it at that is not really asking them to leave. The only real way to ask them to leave is to authorize forcible removal. And I think doing that before Oakland, before almost every major city in the country, would have been not just a moral and economic equity and conversation and democracy and First Amendment mistake. I think it would have been a strategic mistake. I think you would have had listservs lit all over the country, people then not linking arms for several hours, but for several days. And the odds that we would have avoided a situation that Oakland had, the odds that we would have had something even more challenging that we faced, I think would have gone up. And frankly, I would rather have people occupying our park than occupying our port. I think this required at least two things. One, direct engagement. The question, as I first heard it, was not only how we disagreed maybe among each other, or agreed or disagreed with the city. That's some of how I agreed with the city. I agreed more with the city than the other candidates for mayor. Here's where I would disagree. More direct engagement. Had I known, had I anticipated that we would be calling for ouster in 5 weeks, I would not have gone to Asia. I would have spent more time walking the parks. I would have spent more time engaging and having direct contact with the sort of non-organizer organizers, and simultaneously working to build positive results from that activity. Figure out how to shift some of that energy to something that was lasting and positive. Whether it was a plan for more foreclosure prevention, as we proposed and are still working on in Salem right now, whether it was a plan to move money from Wells Fargo and federal banks into local and community banks, as we proposed, whether it was a plan for a Saturday market for nonprofits, whether it was a plan for 99 actions for the 99% crowdsourced on the internet. But some way to give the participants a win, partly morally, partly based on the First Amendment, partly based on our values and who we are as Portlanders, even though it cuts against what the Portland Business Alliance wanted, what the commercial realtors wanted, what the PGE Executive Committee wanted. I know that, but I think that they were wrong strategically.
Time.
The next question is, as you know, the PPB is being audited by the Federal Department of Justice. What do you hope they will include in their summary report? Are there any particular segments within our community that you worry may be especially vulnerable to excessive use of force by the Portland Police Bureau? How will you address the pushback from the Portland Police Association?
That's a lot of questions. I'll go as fast as I can. First of all, I hope that the report is complete and looks at all the issues. I think that it needs to be done in the light of day and all of its findings be public. Then I also believe that we have to make sure that it includes recommendations about practices that we change, both training and procedure, and if necessary, changes in state law. Then I believe that it's the responsibility of the whole City Council, not just the mayor as commissioner in charge, but the whole City Council to engage in those issues and make sure that we make the changes that it recommends. I believe it's already evident who our most vulnerable are. It's people of color and it's people suffering from mental illness. Those two populations within our community already are vulnerable, and we've had more evidence than just that investigation, and some of it tragic, that those problems exist. I'm sorry, the last part of the question.
The last part was, how would you address pushback from the Portland Police Association?
It's hard to change a paramilitary organization. The Police Bureau is just that, and I don't mean that as a slam. That's what they are. They'll tell you that. And in fact, I know this because I changed one, the Portland Fire Bureau. When I took over the Portland Fire Bureau, there were 6 African American men, 2 Asian men, and 3 women in that bureau. The Black Firefighters Association used to joke that they could have their meeting in a minivan. And I brought in a fire chief, the first ever from outside of the Fire Bureau, and we changed that, and now there are 137, I believe, women and people of color in that bureau. We're not there yet in terms of being fully representative of the city, but we're a lot better than we were. And I was opposed in those changes. So sometimes you just have to push. You have to try to bring people along and persuade and hold up the values of our community. But sometimes you have to say, I'm the boss, and here's where we're going.
Time.
Sorry, really briefly, the last question pertains to the Portland Police Union.
Well, that's what I mean.
Okay.
That with the union and the workforce, sometimes you just have to say, we're going to agree to disagree. The firefighters union filed grievances against many of the things that I changed. They now welcome, in fact, I was at the firefighters union hall the other day. They were taking pictures of a candidate, not one of us, that was being supported, and the little fire crew that they had for the photo opportunity was 2 white guys with the same mustache, an African-American man, and a woman. The picture would not have been possible, ironically, but for the changes that I made, and it was fun to see.
Thank you for clarifying.
Let me see if I remember all 3 of them, but let me start with the last one. The one thing about being 50, which I am, having raised my children, I know who my friends are, I've had my career, I don't come with 20 years of political stakeholders, is you can do the right thing. You can stand up on principle. There's a lot of freedom that goes along with that. I feel that in the campaign. I expect I'll feel it when I'm in office. If the recommendations for best practices require pushing our force and the members of this union in the correct direction, I'm going to do that. We have to have both a respected and accountable force. And there is no reason that we can't do that. And I'm going to stand up for justice. I'm going to stand up for equity. I'm going to stand up for transparency. I'm going to stand up for accountability. You can count on me. So in terms of the other specific questions, I'm most concerned about, in terms of vulnerable populations, communities of color. I'm concerned about mental health, mentally ill individuals. I'm concerned about people, no matter what their sexual orientation is. We have to have a public safety system that's actually safe for everyone. And if the recommendations and the data says we are not living up to the best practices, and by the way, if anybody is impacted by use of force, officer-involved use of force, that's too many people. We can improve this system. If anybody is impacted, we can take it to the next level. We will implement policies, we will implement training, we will implement upstream programs so that our force feels capable of dealing with these issues, and our community partners with the force to get to the end game, which is safe neighborhoods for everybody.
So let's talk about the power of the mayor. Yes, the power of the mayor is to delegate bureaus. Yes, the power of the mayor is to do the budget. Perhaps the most important power of the mayor, if you do it right, is being the mayor, is the power to convene and the power to advocate. I agree that in taking the last portion of the question first, that it will require backbone. It will require the ability to say no, even when very powerful and entrenched people say yes. I've done that before, I can do it again, and I've done it recently. It will also take everybody here and the people who aren't here. The greatest power of the mayor is the power of the community, to convene and activate and empower the community. And for the next mayor to do it well, you have to do that well. I have spent the last 10 years of my life engaging people in democracy, empowering more people in our system of government. It is not for me a campaign line. It is why I do this work in the first instance. To me, the reason we have elected officials is to empower other people. I also believe that's how you're able to negotiate with powerful interests, if you're working with the people and you have them behind you. What I hope that the Department of Justice report will show or not show, I hope that it will offer us findings about whether there is adequate or inadequate report of use of force, investigation of use of force, whether there is adequate or inadequate supervision over use of force, whether or not we have prompt enough sergeants reporting to scenes when there has been a shooting. I hope we have indications of adequate or inadequate training, not only training for supervision, but also training for de-escalation, so that people listen earlier and ask earlier, not shoot earlier. In terms of your other question, vulnerable populations. Absolutely empirically, it is our mentally ill population, it is our African American population, our population of color. But it's also all of us. And the case that I want to make to the whole city of Portland, and not just when I'm in this building, is that we are all in this together. And that if we have a situation where people aren't trusting the police don't like that either. We want all of us to be safe. It impacts all of our communities, all of our safety. I see the sign.
Keep that. Oh, all right. The next question is, what are your views about the recent City Council decision to re-engage with the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force? And under your leadership, would you continue this participation, or would you seek to disengage, as we had once disengaged? Yeah.
So, everybody's hearing the question just fine? No. Oh, the question, I apologize, I'll repeat the question. It was, how do we feel about the recent decision to engage or re-engage in the Joint Terrorism Task Force? So, it is, and I don't want to pander to the question, but I do want to say it is a critically important question, because if you were going to identify the most important duties of an elected executive, I believe they include the protection of safety of its citizens. We run on jobs, schools, and healthcare. But in terms of our primary duties, it is to protect the safety of our citizens and to advocate and protect their civil liberties. Those are the most important things we do. And I will advocate and protect civil liberties as I have as an elected official and as an advocate. I will also acknowledge that I was in favor of Tom Potter's decision to withdraw. Right now, I think we have two choices, either depart or constructively engage. I think there's two things we should be thinking about in terms of constructively engaging. One, my dad was a district attorney. I have friends from law school and friends beyond that who are U.S. attorneys. I will say, even to the people who are most concerned over the application of state power, if I were going to choose between the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the U.S. Attorney's Office over who is going to be advocating, protecting civil liberties, I'll pick the U.S. Attorney's Office. They are watching more closely, they have a more a deeper awareness of the First Amendment. They went to law school, and not just because they were looking to get the highest paying job. You have to watch everybody, but they can be helpful. So how I would deal with it is I would pay close attention. I am disturbed by the recent ACLU report. If there are repeated and serious violations or risks to civil liberties, we should withdraw. And the mayor can't do that and will not do that unilaterally, but should be and be willing to be one of the 3 votes to do that. And if I see repeated and serious violations of civil liberties, I will not only be one of those votes, I will advocate for there to be 2 more. And at this point, I'm taking a wait-and-see attitude, but I also want to make sure we're cognizant of what constructive engagement looks like.
You know, I think when you try to evaluate candidates at this season of the year, you know, the question I think always in our minds as voters is, well, do they really mean that, and will they really stand up when the heat is on? And will what they say about their convictions be displayed in their actions? We always wonder that. But in my case, you don't have to wonder, because I was there and I did what I said I did with the Fire Bureau. And I was there and I was the only vote against joining the Joint Terrorism Task Force. And that was not an easy place to be in voting against that. And I remain very skeptical about this process and this approach. Like Jefferson, I think it should first be a wait-and-see attitude, but I want to review whether this is an appropriate use of our time and credibility. And at its core, what we're doing in that kind of police work is the opposite of community policing. It's secret, it's non-inclusive. It's not involving the community and making ourselves safer in partnership with the police bureau. So at its core, we should be skeptical about it because it is so at odds with that philosophy of community policing that I think is the healthy and durable and just way to police the community. So if I vote against it again, I don't expect to be alone.
I'll make this pretty quick. Last spring, I thought that the council actually had come to a pretty reasonable way of looking at how to proceed with the JTTF. I thought, actually, I'll shout out to Nick Fish. I think he spent quite a bit of time negotiating that. That was premised on 2 conditions. One is that we were going to get an annual, transparent report of what's going on. The second is that the mayor would have access to the information, the potentially secret or top secret information that would be needed to be able to assess the situation. We don't have either of them at this point. That's the big issue that's going on here. We have to demand that we get that annual transparent report. We need that information. If I was mayor right now, I would say, I'll give you 6 months, and let's get that information on my desk and so we can share it with the public. If not, we would consider renegotiating the entire package that we negotiated last year, up to and including pulling out of the JTTF.
Apparently can't project as loud as I thought I could.
You're facing us.
The last police union contract negotiations were supposed to take place in public. Many community members agreed to participate in this narrowly open process, yet the deal took place over lunch at the PPA offices, totally out of the eyes of the public. Do you think police contract negotiations should be open to the public, and if so, why, and if not, why not? And how will you ensure the public has access to the entire process?
Transparency has always been important to me. On a lighter note, I've always said from a grocery perspective that we should know what's inside our foods. We should know what the labels say. We should be able to go up to the shelf and know what's inside. As a health fund board member for the last 4 years at the statewide health policy board, I have been an advocate for transparency in our data, transparency in our healthcare system, so that we can transform that system. This is a pretty simple question, folks. We committed to negotiating these contracts in public. We should do it.
Yes, I agree with that. Yes, and the reason is not just that it's your money, though that's a good reason, but also because these issues are very important at the policy level as well. So it's sad that that commitment was made and then not kept. It's a very important part of what I want to do as your next mayor is we need to restore the credibility of this office and the ability to stick to our agreements as well.
Not only yes, but let me say something about how. The way it went down last time is that the meetings hosted by the city council were public, and those hosted by the police bureau were at the option of the police bureau not. One way to get them public wherever they're hosted is to bring 2 city councilors with you. If there's 3, public meeting laws applies, and everybody gets to come, including him. So, yes, and that's how.
And our final question is, over the past several years,
You are watching Oregon Voters Digest. This program can be seen again on these channels on these dates and times. Tell a friend.
Welcome back. Dr. Bethel, this next segment, who are we going to be looking at?
Thank you, Bruce. Please join me now as I question the city commissioners in the race for city commissioners for Portland this year.
Okay. Let's tune in now.
Ready to play.
Very quickly, say your name and what position you're running for, and then I will turn it over to the questioners.
I'm Amanda Fritz. I'm running for re-election for position number 1.
Good evening. My name is Mary Nolan. I'm running for position 1.
Mark White, position number 4.
Jerry Williams, position number 4.
Steve Novick, position number 4.
Thank you all. And this gentleman over in the corner is the timekeeper, and he will stop you when you exceed the 2-minute allotted time. He will warn you when you have 30 seconds left, and then after that, you will be done. And who am I giving the mic to?
You're going to give the mic to Amanda Fritz. Dr. T. Allen Bethel, I will be posing questions to the candidates, and which question I ask, when you finish your 2 minutes, just pass it right on down. And then when it gets on the end, you will hold for question number 2, and it'll come back this way. Okay, we're ready to go. Question number 1. What is your main concern regarding communities of color and people with mental health issues interacting with the Portland Police Department? Is this a systemic problem? And if so, why? And what do you propose to do to fix it? And if not, would you please explain?
Yes, we have a systemic problem with our police and with communities of color and with people with mental illnesses. I was a psychiatric nurse for 22 years. I worked at OHSU for that time. And that has been my focus in dealing with police community interactions over the 3 years that I've been on the council. And one of the main reasons I'm seeking re-election. The system didn't get as broken as it is overnight, and it's not going to get fixed immediately. What I've been doing is working so that I'm in charge of the 911 Bureau, so that community folks feel safe calling 911, and so that we dispatch mental health professionals rather than police to people experiencing mental health crisis in our community. We also have been revising the protocols so that when the police are dealing with people with mental illnesses, they don't necessarily go in with their guns and tasers drawn, that sometimes they step back and allow the person more time to decompress and allow the time for the specialist to come in so that the person can be taken care of in a calm and caring and mental health care manner rather than in the traditional police sense. We've made some progress, but there's still a lot of work to be done. I work with Commissioner Judy Shepherd on the county, Cascadia Behavioral Health. Chair Kogan is now involved, And we want to make sure that our system works better both initially and if the police are called. And if we can get the police so that they're not involved most of the time, that's going to work best for most community members.
Same question.
You bet. Thank you. My main concern with police interactions with any part of our community is to assure that we have good understanding. That's probably the biggest commonality between police interactions with communities of color and police interactions with patients or situations where mental health is an issue. Because other than that, I think there are some important differences that we need to acknowledge. The biggest improvement that we can make is in training, preparation, and policy setting at the Police Bureau. I start from a premise that we need an opportunity for good dialogue, but we have to assume an element of goodwill first. And that's where the training and preparation comes in. I will support policies at the city, as I have at the state, for really adroit anticipatory training so that police are fully aware of the situation they're walking into, have already established good open communication with members of the community, and know what kind of resources they have available to them to call on, not just within the police bureau, but within the community at large, to help them see where they're missing something, where they're making a mistake, where they have some improvement, some change they need to make. Thank you.
So I would say a couple of things. One, a lack of trust within the community and the unwillingness, or rather the lack of the ability of the city to take that on straightforward and just try and address it. Also a lack of training that's been mentioned. And also I would say that there's a lack, or rather insufficient number of officers from communities of color. So I'd like to change that as well to start with. But as far as training is concerned, I'd like to see some kind of similar to the medical profession, where there's continuing education, where every year officers are required to have a certain amount of training every year for them to kind of keep up on their skills, including de-escalation in particular, and a number of other things that really need to be addressed in order for them to kind of rebuild that trust with the community.
Yes, it is a systemic problem. I have a lot more history with the police than anybody else up here from both sides, and mostly from being out on the streets and being someone who police arrested. And I was speaking for Women's History Month at Portland Community College before I came over here today, describing that those arrests. That was 23 years ago. Throughout the years, when Kendra James got shot and the AMA came out and made their own response as to what they thought happened, I agreed with it, and it fell on deaf ears. And the people said they believed what they believed anyway, and it was the biggest sense of injustice I had ever felt. And what I felt was, if we cannot, how can we possibly feel safe when people are clearly making these judgments that we know are not true? It hurts. I've been arrested as a person driving while brown in this community. I've had many interactions with the police, both good and bad. I was helping a young woman get out of trafficking and was stalked by a pimp who then, when he came to my house to shoot me, the police did not write a report and did not, and lost the evidence I gave them. And so it caused a really big problem, and I feel like they thought I was just some dirty person who didn't deserve the right to have a report written for them or to have justice. So I'm a person who's understood this from many different angles. Recently I've worked with the Portland police, educating them on the fact that 14-year-old girls, when they are arrested for being trafficked, that they are not criminals. The police were saying they're criminals if they don't tell on their pimp, they're victims if they do. We need some mind shifts here, people. Beyond training and beyond the other things, we need a culture shift in the way that people look at us and the way that we look at people. Thank you.
I think that there are several systemic problems. One of them, Mark mentioned, we need a more diverse police force. We need a force that looks like the community. And I recently read an article about the Los Angeles police force, of all things, and how they've managed to diversify significantly in the past 10 years, and their acceptance within the community, their respect of the community is up. If Los Angeles can do it with its grim history, then I think we should be able to do it. We have an independent police review division that never and actually does independent reviews of police misconduct. That is a puzzling thing. There was a researcher, an academic analyst from Arizona, I believe it was a few years ago, who laid out some recommendations. Here are circumstances in which the independent police review division should do reviews. I don't understand why that hasn't been followed. We also have, the chief, I met with the chief last week, and he said that police work has changed. Crime is down. Police are more often acting as social workers. And I was glad to hear him say that. I'm not sure that all of the force realizes that. I've actually met with a group of union members, and I was pleased to meet with them. They had a good conversation. But at one point, they were talking about the number of police isn't high enough and to keep up with the population. And I said, but isn't crime down? And they all looked at me like I was crazy and said, what do you mean crime's down? Where did you get that? Well, I don't know how representative that attitude is, but the police should know that crime is down. The police should know they're not walking around in an armed camp. And I think that if that was really well known and understood throughout the force, that they're not walking around in constant danger, that might affect the way folks interact with the community. And also, another systemic problem, of course, is we have an underfunded mental health system. And I want to stress underfunded, not a broken system. There's good people working very hard, but we have an underfunded mental health system. And I have actually proposed to the governor and to Chair Kogan an ambitious way of restructuring the entire public safety budget statewide that would shift money from prisons to prevention, including mental health.
Thank you, Steve. Steve and I had many discussions over coffee about this issue, and we did agree. You know, if you don't know how to...
Jerry, I'm sorry. It goes back to
Steve.
Oh,
Steve.
Oh, right.
Oh, that's right. Sorry about
New
that.
question.
Kali will ask the second question.
Thank you, all of you, for running and for being here this evening. This is an important question, as they all are. We'd like you to tell us what you know about the type of tasers used by police in Oregon and the chemical weapons, the agents. Do they vary from city to city, and do you think they should?
My understanding is that the tasers are fairly uniform. That you shoot one, that right now our police use primarily a taser gun that shoots one dart that opens up into barbs, that there are other guns with that shoot more than one dart. And the effect of a taser obviously is incredible pain for a short, hopefully a short period of time, but obviously that's sort of up to the officer's discretion. So I'm not aware actually that there really are too many other products on the market. In terms of chemical agents, I mean, you know that in terms of pepper spray, there are wildly varying kinds, and my understanding is that we, the Police Bureau, recently went to a product that is far more hot, far more painful than what we had before. Their argument is that previously pepper spray was uncomfortable but didn't actually incapacitate anybody, so they'd rather use something that actually does incapacitate somebody than something that doesn't. That is their perspective. I would like to hear other perspective from people who actually have been pepper sprayed under both the old, allegedly cooler pepper spray and what they're using now.
I'm not an expert on tasers. So what I know is that recently Chief Reese said that he thought that the way we look at excessive use of force currently is okay. I don't actually believe it is. And I believe that once again we go back to the cultural point of view of who's ending up in jail, who's the ones who are getting beat up by the police, and who are the ones that are getting shot. And so there are larger issues right now, I believe, than knowing whether or not we have the most effective way to hurt someone. I actually think we need to look at the fact that we don't want to hurt people, and we don't want to abuse people who already have mental illness in a very unfunded society.
I'm also not as familiar with tasers. What I've heard in our public hearings for the Charter Commission with regard to pepper spray is that it's much, much more powerful than it has been in the last several years. What I'd actually like to talk about is that one of the things I'd like to see is both of those be reclassified from being considered tools to being considered weapons, and have them addressed just like if a gun is discharged, if a taser is used, if pepper spray is used, the same process it applies. And I think that will, in one way, it will reduce the amount of times that it's used, but it will also make sure that people clearly understand when they use it that there's going to be ramifications from that. So that's kind of where I stand with those. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, and thank you for giving it to us in advance, because it provoked me to do some homework that was long overdue, and I suspect that was part of your purpose here. So I did investigate the tasers that the city uses, and my notes tell me that it's an X26, but I didn't know what that was before, and really I don't claim to be an expert now either. But just your question helped open my eyes to both that question and the issue around the MK3 chemicals that the city is using. I'm not more concerned in terms of uniformity with other cities, not so much about the specific tool or weapon, and I think Mark makes some good points about how we classify these instruments, but I'm concerned about the consistency of our policies for when and how they're used, as well as how we report about them after they're used. And I know that there have been evaluations around at least cities in Oregon who use tasers and tear gas and other chemical weapons or crowd suppressors. The ACLU has led some of those evaluations and made proposals about how cities might update or change their policies about when it is appropriate to use those different implements. And they ought to be driven from a perspective that the police's role is to protect the citizenry, to protect the people, and that includes every person who is living here or happens to be visiting here. And I'd be very interested in conversations at the city council level and with the police chief about whether it's appropriate to update and look at perhaps Ashland is an example that I understand has changed its policy. And by changing its policy has resulted in fewer instances of use and fewer problems with interaction between the police and even people who are disruptive or confrontational.
So I too do my homework. I'm known for looking at the details. In fact, I voted against the Joint Terrorism Task Force report yesterday because it doesn't have enough details in it. And to me, your question was a good one, and also any hurtful implements are wrong, that we don't want our police using tasers no matter what kind they are, or pepper spray no matter what kind it is. I was discouraged yesterday to see SUVs with police in riot gear hanging onto the sides, hanging onto the top of the SUV, standing on the running board, not exactly showing safe behavior to the children who are walking around downtown, and looking extremely threatening, you know, with a dozen, it seemed like there were a dozen hanging onto a police car. That didn't give the impression of a friendly police force the way we have seen in the past with the police on the bicycles, without the riot gear, which have been much more effective. At OHSU, we found that there was a marked decrease in taser use when the officers were required to document when they drew their taser rather than when they used it. And so requiring more paperwork, and that's something that is in the use of force report that I'm going to be following up on. Independent police review staff are looking at the latest use of force report, as is the Human Rights Commission, which did an excellent summary a couple of years ago about use of tasers and use of other deadly and hurtful weapons. We need to make sure that we're following up on those reports and seeing if the recommendations are implemented, and that's what I do. I ask for those follow-up reports, and especially when we have our Office of Equity and Human Rights, we will be tracking and making sure that bureaus are held accountable, no matter where they are, what they do, to come back and tell the community, this is what the recommendations were. We put a lot of time into our reports. The auditor did a report on taser use. let's do the follow-up. Let's make sure that we implement the recommendations.
Okay, welcome back. Again, that's the candidates fair. There was we got most of it, at least, that is, as far from the AMA is concerned. And Dr. Bethel is here, and I'm just going to have him maybe comment, if you will, on some of the other activities. And how did you feel about the fair?
I thought the forum went very well, very well. There was about 50 people more that was in attendance for it. And of course, it seems like the most important part for the people on that night was the City Council Commissioner's race. Yeah. There was a great number of people there, and I think if we had more time, there would have been a lot more questions from the floor. I did want to note, however, that in this, particularly something that was said in the mayor's is that the mayor must be the mayor. And I think and I believe that that's one of the things that the community must look at and say that we're going to hold whomever becomes mayor responsible for being the mayor, to convene, negotiate, do whatever it takes to help make the city more livable and safe for all of us. In that commissioner's race for city council, each candidate had a lot of points. And I believe it's going to be a tough race. But I would want to encourage everyone who looks and who listens to look at what the issues are. Listen to what the candidates said that they would do. Listen to their knowledge. Listen to how they express themselves. And based on that, try to make the best decision that you can make for get the type and the right people behind the seats so that we can do something that will change the things that's happening within our city.
It's my understanding also, too, Dr. Bethel, that you are going to be following other races, too. I take it, I think you had the U.S. Attorney there and possibly the DA, but my point is that you're going to be looking at all the races of it.
Yes, we're looking at all the races, and in the forum we also had the Oregon State Attorney General candidate, as well as we had the Multnomah County District Attorney candidate. Unfortunately, for the Multnomah County, there's only one choice because we have only one person running. But that doesn't mean that we can't hold that person accountable. We can. For the Attorney Generals, one of the candidates showed up, but that is still a very critical place, a critical race, and we want the right person there in the AG's office for the state of Oregon, because civil rights investigations and things like that are very important, and not just to wait until there's a crisis, but that they will begin to do something to help make and be preventative in what's happening around this country and this state.
You know, I was going to ask you, because I know that you've spent quite a bit of time in the AMA, and others like yourselves have spent quite a time actually trying to work with the police department too, for that matter. And hopefully maybe in some time in the future we might be able to get them to come and talk, as Jeff had made the point about us really working all together.
Yes, I would love for the AMA's Coalition for Police Accountability and Reform to have an opportunity to talk about that, and perhaps invite in the chief or some others like that, so we can talk about what's happening with the police bureau.
Dr. Bethel, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be here today.
Again, folks, as George Page always said, back to what you believe in. See you next time around. Have a good one.